at Vanderbilt University Med Center. It's a pleasure to introduce Secretary Alex Azar today. We're very grateful for his visit to Vanderbilt University Med Center and for taking time to meet with our dedicated investigators who are focused on COVID-19 research. Today, the Secretary spent time hearing about two different major projects that are ongoing here that actually address COVID-19. The first is a convalescent plasma clinical trial, which is being coordinated here and at 50 sites across the nation. And the second study you heard about was our participation in a multi-enrollment site phase 3 trial to test the Moderna vaccine. Secretary Azar, we are grateful for HHS, obviously NIH and Operation Warp Speed investments in the scientists here and nationwide as they actually look for new treatments as well as preventative strategies for COVID-19. And as always, thank you for your continuing support of biomedical research through HHS. Please, the podium.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Pietenpol, for welcoming us to Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and thanks to everyone for such a warm welcome today in Nashville. Here in Nashville, I've gotten to see firsthand the historic mobilization of the private sector and all elements of American society that we need to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic. This all-out effort, led by President Trump, is really the most impressive mobilization of American society we've seen since World War II. Just here in Nashville, I've learned about how Smile Direct Club is not only using its expertise in telehealth to help Americans continue receiving dentistry services, but also using 3D printing technology to churn out 60,000 face shields and other personal protective equipment that we can use to keep America's heroic healthcare workers safe. And then at Vanderbilt, we're seeing heroic efforts by frontline healthcare workers to continue getting Tennesseans the care they need while also bringing world-class expertise to bear in developing new tools to beat COVID-19. VUMC has been partnering with NIH to leverage community partnerships to recruit 1,000 volunteers for the final phase 3 clinical trial of the NIH Moderna vaccine, and recently received a major grant from NIH to support the gathering of randomized, high-quality data on the efficacy of convalescent plasma. One note on the vaccine clinical trials. It is crucial that we have diverse participation in these trials. NIH and HHS have been working with community partners to conduct outreach and build trust within minority communities and encourage participation of those from minority communities. This is critical to the success of the science and data-driven process of developing a safe and effective vaccine. You can learn more about how to volunteer for the coronavirus vaccine trials at coronavirus.gov. Meanwhile, we've been working closely with our public health partners in Tennessee to track the spread of the virus and save lives. That includes making available more than $155 million in funding for the state to use on testing and related public health activities, and sending more than 1 million swabs and 922,000 media to support testing in the state. These efforts are producing real positive results. Across Tennessee, we've seen a downward trend in cases over the past several days, although cases are up when just looking at Nashville alone. That's a reminder that we still have a great deal of work ahead of us. I want to thank everybody that I've met in Nashville for the life-saving work that you've been doing. I want to thank Governor Lee, who joined us here to visit the vaccine clinical trials, for his tremendous work leading Tennessee through all of this. And I want to remind all Tennesseans that there are easy things each of us can do to play a role in slowing the spread and saving lives. That means remembering the 3 W's. Wash your hands, watch your distance, wear your face coverings when you can't maintain social distance, and stay out of settings where you can't do those things, especially to students here at places like Vanderbilt, but also at other colleges and universities in Tennessee. The 3 W's are your ticket to remaining physically at school. Practice individual responsibility. Practice the 3 W's. It's how you get to remain at school. Thank you again, everyone, for welcoming me to Nashville, and I'm now happy to take some questions from you all. Yes, yeah. Well, I'm not going to comment on somebody's personal social media posts. Obviously, some of those statements are concerning. Michael Caputo has been a valued member of our coronavirus response, but I'm not otherwise going to get into that. The Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs for your agency, you're not going to comment? Those are his personal social media posts, and I'm not going to have more to say at this moment on that. Thank you. Other questions? Secretary, yep. Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that November 1st communication, because it's important to clarify what's going on there. So thanks to President Trump's Operation Warp Speed initiative, which we got to see really being implemented right here at Vanderbilt today, both on the Moderna vaccine as well as on the convalescent plasma clinical trials, we are making historic progress towards vaccines. We now have invested and are contracted with 6 different vaccine manufacturers across 3 separate platforms or technologies for delivering vaccine. We now have 3 of those in the last stage of clinical trials. Those are called phase 3 clinical trials. Each of those will have over 30,000 people in them. Those trials launched, a couple of them the end of July. Another one launched a couple weeks ago. And we may see more vaccines enter into phase 3 clinical trials soon. The CEO of Pfizer has publicly stated that they actually think they could see data by the end of October. We don't know when we see data from these clinical trials. The way it works is half of the volunteers receive vaccine and half receive what's called a placebo. And then once they've received their vaccinations of either the vaccine or the placebo, you wait to see if individuals actually contract coronavirus. That data is collected by an independent data and safety monitoring board, independent of the government, independent of the company sponsoring the trials. That independent board reviews the data. They determine if there's a safety reason to halt or stop a trial. They determine if the data is demonstrating that a clinical trial is futile and should not continue to go forward. Or they determine that that clinical trial has met a pre-specified statistically significant endpoint such that the results should be reported out. One doesn't know when those results will come in because it's data based on the course of disease in localities, accruing cases. It is possible that we could see data in October. We are currently manufacturing vaccine. We already have over 1 million doses of vaccine manufactured that are going through quality control processes right now, and we will keep manufacturing more. That is the genius of what President Trump has commissioned in Operation Warp Speed, to move ahead on development but also manufacture commercial scale vaccine at the same time. We have to be acting responsibly that if there is a possibility we could have positive data and have vaccine and have FDA authorization, we should be ready to distribute it. So the career officials at CDC sent, under Dr. Bob Redfield, the director of CDC's signature, a letter to governors saying, please be working with us to plan on how you would distribute vaccine through our vaccine distribution systems. Please plan that this could happen as early as November 1st. It's important to plan for contingencies. That's an optimistic contingency, but we have to plan for it because, God forbid, we have positive results, positive FDA action, positive production of vaccine, and not a distribution system for that. And so we have to plan for that. That's what that's the only, that date was picked by the career officials at CDC, and that's a planning, just a forward planning assumption for that. Yes.
How confident are you that with such a short timeline for these vaccines that they are going to be safe vaccines, and is there any that you see as more promising than others?
Well, I want to be really, I'm glad you asked about this because there's been so many misconceptions about how vaccine development works, and I got to see that at Vanderbilt here today, how it really works, and I want to explain that to folks. The clinical trials that are being engaged in here and elsewhere are actually some of the largest vaccine clinical trials ever, at 30,000 plus individuals in each vaccine's clinical trial, so extremely large. The safety protocols. I was able to meet with two of the principal investigators here at Vanderbilt, along with one of the trial subjects who was getting vaccinated today. And I was able to hear from them that in their experience, the safety protocols, the level of check-in and monitoring for patient safety is actually something that's at a higher level than they have experienced in their extensive clinical trial work before here at Vanderbilt. We are not cutting corners on safety or efficacy or data requirements in order to get to a vaccine. What Operation Warp Speed is doing is basically taking the financial risk away that normally would lead a drug company to move slower. So with drug development, a drug company will do one stage of clinical trials, wait for those results before investing the money to plan for the next stage of clinical trials. Because we are harnessing the entire financial resources of the United States government against this, we can actually take on that risk. We can plan every aspect of the drug development out in advance, and as the science and the data proceed, we're able to move immediately without wasted days in between for planning because we've already done that work. And as I mentioned before, we're taking the unprecedented step of engaging in large-scale commercial manufacturing of the vaccine at the same time. Normally, a drug company would wait until they had positive final results, FDA approval, and then do the large-scale commercial manufacturing because they don't want to bear financial risk. We're taking that risk on to do that. And so the standards that we're applying, the 30,000 plus individuals in clinical trial, the statistical endpoints around safety and efficacy, these are the same endpoints that would be present in any clinical trial of vaccines. Statistics are statistics. They don't change based on speed. And I think that the American people should actually be very reassured by the recent announcement regarding the AstraZeneca vaccine, where because of a single potential serious adverse event in the United Kingdom, that trial was put on hold again by that independent Data and Safety Monitoring Board to get to the bottom of whether there was a connection to vaccine and whether there was a reason to be concerned for patient safety. That's the system working. It's an independent safety system. And the President, I, the FDA Commissioner, the Center Directors, the CEOs of the drug companies have all made it clear we're going to do this by the book. We're going to follow the science, the data, the evidence, and that's going to be what drives whether there are vaccines or not. Yes.
So, if the November 1st date is an optimistic goal necessary in case there is a scenario which vaccines are ready, is there a different date that you are more confident in as something where it's likely that a vaccine will be proven safe, proven effective, and be ready?
So I'm not going to make predictions about particular dates except to say that as we look at the probabilization of having so many clinical trials and so many major investments across 3 different platforms of vaccine technology and scaling large-scale commercial manufacturing, I will repeat what I have said many times before. We believe it is highly credible that we will have in the high tens of millions of doses of FDA gold standard vaccine by the end of this year, and many hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine as we go into next year.
Last question.
Yes.
What would we possibly see, or who would rather get their hands on the vaccine first?
So the issue of distribution is an important one, and I actually commissioned the National Academy of Sciences to run a process of outside experts to provide advice to the CDC on which groups, how one might prioritize a vaccine. Because, of course, while we will have many hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine eventually, one doesn't have that on day one, and so you'll want to and need to prioritize. And so the National Academy, a little over a week ago, I believe, came out with draft recommendations. They put those for public comment, had a hearing on them. They will eventually finalize their recommendations to us. That will go to the CDC. The CDC will then work with their independent public advisory board called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices to review that information and that input. But most importantly, we really have to wait until we see the data from the clinical trials on vaccines, because it may be that one vaccine's safety and efficacy profile is more appropriate for elderly, vulnerable patients in nursing homes, and another might be more appropriate for healthy healthcare workers or first responders. And so it'll have to be really driven by the data, but I think the overlaying premise is the vaccine should go where it can add the most value and where needed most, but we will run a transparent process to do that as we work to prioritize. But again, I can't give you any concrete decisions on that because it has to be driven by science and data out of the clinical trials. Okay. Thank you all very much for coming out today. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here in Nashville. You know, Nashville is just really one of the great healthcare centers in the United States. It's the bed of so much innovation in healthcare. And to your readers, to those who are watching, again, I ask you, please practice the 3 W's. Wash your hands, watch your distance, wear your face coverings when you can't be socially distant, and avoid settings where you're unable to do those things. These are the simple steps that are our tools to remaining back to work, back to education, back in our community. We need to practice those, and we know from our data that if we will do those simple things, we can see impacts in terms of controlling the spread of disease that are comparable to actually shutting down. And so please practice individual responsibility, the 3 W's. Thank you all very much.